Bible is open to the last chapter of Acts, chapter 28. You boys in the recording room, we're in Acts chapter 28. I was never solicited to see what scripture we're using, so I want to tell you we're in Acts 28. You people online, we've been studying the book of Acts since September, and we are at the last chapter now, and it is divided. It is divided between Paul, Luke, and Aristarchus arriving at Malta, and divided when they arrived at Rome. Paul had been wanting to go to Rome, I believe, since he became a Christian. He mentioned it in his letter to the Romans, which was written in Corinth, that he wanted to see them. He wanted to have fruit among them. He wanted to go to Rome. He wanted to visit the church there. He did not go immediately. He went on another missionary journey, and then a second missionary journey, and then a third. And then he went to Jerusalem, and from there to Rome. Now, young people, there's something interesting right here. Paul wanted to go to Rome. Why in the world did he not, when it came to Troas on his third journey, get on a boat or walk over the mountains like Epaphras did and go to Rome? Why didn't he go? But instead, he wanted to go to Jerusalem, and from Jerusalem, he went to Rome. Why did he not just go? Why did he not leave Troas and go to Rome? He went to Jerusalem. His desire to go to Rome, he had no thought that the way he would get to Rome would be by becoming a prisoner of the Roman Empire. God had a reason that Paul didn't walk over to the mountains of Rome, walk into Rome, find the synagogue, and say, I'm here to meet with the Jews and also to preach to the Gentiles. I'm here. Why did he go to Rome, go to Jerusalem, and be taken into the city as a prisoner? God has a way for all things. Who can know the mind of God? Who has been his counselor? Who can tell God what to do? Who can tell God what way to do it? In his doxology in Romans 11, who can know the mind of the Lord? Who has been his counselor? Whoever gave him anything, and God gave it back because they gave. For of him, through him, and to him are all things. Why did God take Paul to Jerusalem? And there he was beaten, and there he had conflict, and there he was almost killed. Then he was taken down to Caesarea and spent 2 years there. Then on a ship for months in a storm going toward Rome. Finally ends up on an island and spends 3 months there waiting on spring to come. and then on his way, stopping to get to Rome, and he walked in. Why did he not just go from Troas on a ship or walk over the mountains and walk into Rome? Why did he go to Jerusalem, get into all kinds of trouble, became a prisoner of the Roman Empire, taken down to Caesarea for 2 years, and then on a boat for months, having a hard time with the weather, then spending 3 months on Malta before he goes to Rome? God had a plan. It was a plan for Paul to reach Romans, Gentiles. God wanted to reach them. And by becoming a prisoner, he met a Roman centurion. Then he was in the hands of the Romans in Caesarea. To a Roman governor, he preached the gospel, Felix. To another Roman governor, Festus. To a king of the Roman Empire, Agrippa. Then he's on the boat, and he goes on, and it's got a Roman centurion watching over 273 soldiers. And then he goes into Rome, and he's put in a Roman prison where he wrote and said, my gospel has gone out further. He's reaching Roman guards. Roman guards every night have him handcuffed to them, and he witnesses to Romans. And he's there for long enough that he wrote Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians, and Philemon. All the time he's handcuffed to a Roman guard. And then he said to the Philippian church as he closed the books, remember those of Caesar's household. Paul wanted to go to Rome to be with the Jews and fellowship with them. Where did he end up? He ended up in prison with Caesar, the king of Rome's family, the government officials of Rome, preaching the gospel to them. He had no idea that going to Rome he would be in prison where he would preach to prisoners, especially of Caesar's family. So God had a different plan. Paul, you can go to Rome, climb over the mountains there, or get on a boat and go and meet with the Jews. God, no, you'll go to Jerusalem, you'll get in trouble, you'll be arrested into the hands of the Romans, and you'll witness to the Roman Felix, the Roman Festus, and Agrippa. And then when you get there, you're going to be locked up with prisoners, and you're going to preach the gospel to the Romans. And he ended up telling Timothy what a ministry he had had among the Gentiles. You might be thinking of some objective you have and how you got your plans made up to get there. You're going to do deputation, you're going to graduate, then you're going to go and do that. That may not be where God wants you. That may not be the place he wants you to build a church. God may have a total different plan for you to go some other way. Best do the will of God today and tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow, and you'll end up in the right place at the right time. But you don't know what that beholds. You got to be ready for anything. I didn't know when I got out of school to be a preacher or a pastor that God was going to put me in the public school and let me teach history, English, and coach basketball for 2 years. I didn't know that. I had no idea that would ever happen, but it did. You just got to daily be subjected to the will of God. Don't set your plans and say, God, there they are. Now you bless them. You better not do that. God is God, and God is sovereign, and God's running the show. And you better not determine it and take your plan and plop it down before God and say, there it is, bless it. Paul, he was going up to Rome just to have fellowship with the believers and to take them an offering. He could have sent it up with somebody else, but he went because he wanted to see the believers and give them an offering. What happened? They tried to kill him. They tried to destroy him. And if it hadn't been for Rome, the Gentile army, the occupiers of Israel, they would have killed him. But the Romans took him and protected him. God used the Romans that the Jews hated to protect Paul and to get the gospel to the Romans. And he preached even to those of Caesar's household. Into the family of Caesar, he introduced men to Christ. Better not. Who can know the mind of God? Who hath been his counselor and told him, what's the best thing for me to do? I'm telling you, God, what I'm in. Now you stamp your blessing on it. Who can know the mind of God? And who hath been his counselor telling him what to do? No. For all things are of him, through him, and to him, not to you, but to him. Now, we're ready to study. Paul and the 273 men, some sailors taking care of the boat, some Roman guards protecting prisoners of Rome, a centurion and a captain. The boat has broken up. The boat broke up when the front of it jammed into the land. The back end of the boat broke off, then it fell apart, and it's in the sea, just pieces of it here and there. The men that could swim, they swam to the island. Those who couldn't got a hold of a board or got a hold of a piece of the ship that was floating and rowed it. All of them went in to, they didn't know where they were. For 14 days they had been in the darkness. The boat had just been floating on its own. They didn't know where they were. But there's an island there. They're going to go to shore at that island. That's the first time they've been on land since back when the journey started. And we read Acts 28. And when they were escaped from what? The shipwreck. They escaped from drowning. They escaped the shipwreck when the ship fell apart. Then they knew that the island was called Malta, Melita, in the Phoenician language, Malta, translated into English, Malta. They were escaped. They knew that the island was Melita. And the barbarous people showed us no little kindness. Barbarous. When people speak of a barbarian, they usually mean a man who is uneducated, uncultured, lives somewhere in a jungle. He's got a bone through his nose and painting on his face, goes around 90% naked, wild. That's a barbarian. That's what a barbarian is to us, but it wasn't to the people of that day. A barbarian was merely a person that did not speak Greek. Alexander the Great had established Greek as a universal language. People that didn't speak it were known as barbarians. They spoke another language. The people on Malta spoke Phoenicia. Phoenicia was a country just north of Israel, which is today called Lebanon. The Phoenicians had the first navy in the world, and they had gone to that island, and some had stayed there, and the Phoenician language had become the language of Malta, the island. The island is 17 miles long. That would be from here to Parkersburg plus down into Lubeck, 3 or so miles more. From here to Parkersburg, that's how long Malta was. It was not only 17 feet long, it was not 17 miles long, it was 9 feet wide. It wasn't a large island, Malta. If you went straight north from Malta, you would go to Rome. The end of Italy is Sicily. It was 60 miles south of Sicily, at the south end of Italy. To go to Rome would probably be 150 miles, perhaps 200, straight north from Malta to Rome. They're on that island, not a large island, 9 miles wide, as wide as from here to Lowell and a little wider. The barbarous people showed no little kindness. If they were typical barbarians, they would have been in trouble. But they were not the kind of barbarians we think of. They were people that didn't speak Greek. They spoke Phoenician. It had been controlled by Phoenicia, but now it was controlled by Rome. Rome ruled over Malta. So they go there, and the people, unusual, they kindled a fire, showed them no kindness. Here, up out of the water comes all of these men, soaking wet, cold. It's winter. Spring hasn't come yet. It's cold. The water's cold. They've been in that cold water. They come up, their clothes are wet. Paul's wet. Everybody's wet. They've been in the water. Some would swim and some would take hold of a board and float. And they came to Malta, about 276 men coming up out of the water of a ship that had wrecked. The people of Malta came out and must have been standing and watching them. All of those men, over almost 300, coming up out of the water. What did they do? Built a great big fire. It would take a big fire for men, 270 men, to get around it and to get warm and to dry their clothes. It would take not only one fire, but probably many fires. And 300, almost 300 new people have come to Malta. What's these people thinking? But they're kind to them. They showed them no little kindness, which means they showed them great kindness, for they kindled a fire and received us everyone. and because of the present rain, and because of the cold, next. And when Paul had gathered a bundle of sticks, they were all working, bringing sticks to put on this big fire that they needed for almost 300 men. Paul, the great preacher, the writer, he goes to work. He's picking up sticks and carrying them like everybody else. He's a humble man. He's carrying the sticks. He could have stood back and let everybody else do it. He didn't. And he laid them on the fire. And there came, when he picked up these sticks, he didn't notice there was a serpent that had hibernated for the winter. It was like a stick. And he just laid it in with the sticks in his arms. He's in a hurry. He's not watching carefully. And when they got to the heat, the viper came out of its state that it was in and started moving. The viper came out of the heat and fastened on Paul's hand, bit it, sucked his teeth into Paul's hand. And they said among themselves, that man's a murderer. He got by the shipwreck, but he didn't get by God. God's having a vindictive way with him for murdering and letting that serpent bite him to kill him. He got through the shipwreck, but he won't get through with the viper biting him. And they said, this man's a murderer, whom, though he hath escaped the ship, yet vengeance suffereth not to live. Next, but he shook off the beast, shook his hand, the snake fell, beast into the fire. He threw it in the fire and felt no harm. And they're all standing there watching Paul fall over. He's going to die. He's going to die. And Paul he's not acting ill. He's not getting sick like people that have been bitten with a snake and are poisoned. He's going back to work, albeit looked when he should have swollen and fallen down dead. Suddenly, but after they had looked a great while, they changed their minds and said, he's a god. He's a god. The people on the island of Lystra, on his first missionary journey, they said they stoned him, then said he's a god. Here, they said he's a god, and then they blessed him. Same quarters were possessions of the chief man of the island. One man was the head of things on that island. You may have called him a governor or a leader or the general or whatever, but there was one man, Publius, who received us. He had a great living situation. He took Paul to his house, and he took some others and lodged us, Luke writes. He lodged us 3 days courteously at his home. While they were there in Publius' home, the main man on the island, that the father of Publius lay sick of a fever and a bloody flux. There was a disease on the Isle of Malta. They had no cure for it. history tells us that the disease was caused by drinking goat's milk, the milk of a goat, a particular breed of goats. And they had what they called the Malta fever. That was a disease known in that day, Malta fever. And Publius' father had it, and he'd been sick for some times with a fever like Peter's mother at Capernaum. She had a fever. And Paul entered in. He saw the elderly man, been sick now with Malta fever for some time. Sometimes it would last a person 2 years to overcome the Malta fever. In the 1800s, long after Paul and this, 1800s, they discovered a cure for it. Malta today doesn't have it because they discovered a cure in the 1800s. Alistair McKenna and his wife Janet, who were here for prayer conference, they took a vacation in Malta. They flew from Aberdeen, Scotland, down to Malta. They said it was a beautiful island, and there's a great marker where the ship wrecked. There's a marker where they built a fire for Paul, and they had a place where the ship wrecked called St. Paul's Port. St. Paul's Port. And he cured him of his disease. When they found out that Paul had apostolic power to lay hands on people and heal them, they started bringing the sick to him. Next, when this was done, others also, which had diseases in the island, came and were healed. I'll tell you this, not of great theological consequence, but on the Isle of Malta was the last time Paul ever healed. He never healed anybody on the rest of the journey, and he never healed anybody in Rome. The last time Paul ever healed was on the island of Malta, and also honored us with many honors. They gave him honors. And when we departed, they loaded us with such things as were necessary. They were there 3 months. It was winter when the ship hit. And they've been there 3 months. Spring came. When spring came, they found another ship like the other one taking wheat up to Rome. And the centurion made arrangements to put those prisoners on there. And Paul and Luke got on the boat also and went. But the people were very gracious and gave them things they needed for the travel, food to eat as they left. They were a gracious people, and Malta is remembered for what they did for the people. Next verse. After 3 months, we departed in a ship of Alexandria, same place, which had wintered in the island, whose sign was Castor and Pollux. They named the ship Castor and Pollux after 2 Roman gods who were sons of Zeus, the great god of the Greeks. Those 2 names, those twin names, were sons of Zeus, and they landed after they left Malta at Syracuse and tarried there 3 days. Next time, They will arrive in Rome, and we'll study as the last lesson in Acts what happened at Rome when Paul got there, different than he expected. So we'll study that next time. I'm cutting the class short so that the last lesson will be what happened in Rome. That concludes for today.